Cameras rapidly became part of New Zealand households during the first decade of the 1900s, initially starting with the advent of the Kodak Eastman Brownie. They were no longer the preserve of just the rich. Shortly thereafter, the First World War signalled the first appointment of Captain Henry Armitage Saunders as New Zealand's first official photographer and cameraman in 1907. The photo you're looking at now is one of his. Soldiers from the 3rd Battalion New Zealand Rifle Brigade having a giggle on reading a book entitled New Zealand at the Front, while seated on a captured German anti-tank gun in what was no man's land in Belgium. Personal cameras went off to war amongst soldiers' kit. Their superiors initially attempted to ban the practice, or at least frown upon it, as the sordid, bleak realities of life at the front developed. Military authorities rapidly knew they had bigger fish to fry in terms of keeping morale, rather than taking a snap of, say, you and your mates from divisional signals having a beer in a Cairo bar. What harm could come of that? Thus the bigwigs turned a blind eye, and in some instances tacit approval. This is why we are blessed with a significant number of photos from World War I. New Zealand service men and women came home with a large photographic record, placed in boxes under the bed or left in estates and then donated to the New Zealand Army. We need to pay tribute, therefore, to the National Army Museum of New Zealand for painstakingly digitising them for posterity. In a stoic condition, the majority came back with vague details, ambiguous pencils, inscriptions on the back simply with "Dad." Veterans tended not to talk about the war, and thus we are left to piece together what we can from the photo we see in front of us. It's not a precise business, and I'm not a military expert. I'm happy to be corrected. So if I've cocked up, or you can add to the narrative, by all means stick it in the comments. In other terms of a heads up before we venture forth, far from all feature New Zealanders in the frame, and worth a squiz nonetheless. Let us therefore now see what I've picked amongst the thousands of photos for us to look at today. Kindly note there will be follow-ups in the series. Subscribe, a nod's as good as a wink to a blind bat, and you'll get to see them the moment they are uploaded. I wanted to start with this one, which immediately brings to mind the term diggers, right? Ever wonder where that term came from? Well, the British considered New Zealand troops to be the top diggers when it came to trenches. In a recent video I did this one, you may remember I displayed a photo of the Maori battalion digging a communications ditch, or trench. This group especially came in for praise as to their digging prowess in places like this. On the Western Front, consequently, soon all New Zealanders were being endeared with the nickname. For the record, the term diggers was not one originally given to the Australian troops, and they appropriated it. Its origins are uniquely NZ, and the term wasn't used till after Gallipoli. But before I get too bogged down in the trench of trivia, I've got to go over the top. A massive captured German artillery piece, judge its size by the troops in proximity a second. The technical term for the field gun was a 15cm Canon 16. It weighed in at 11,000 kilograms and was 7 metres long. In terms of range, it could fire a 50-kilogram shell, say from the Auckland Sky Tower to the centre of Albany with ease, the Sky Caketon Stadium in Wellington into Porirua, or even Cathedral Square in Christchurch to Kaiapoi. What sort of damage could it cause? These are the photographic evidence if we even needed it. Here we have a photo of a section of the New Zealand line in Belgium. According to the caption, the sandbags in the foreground of the photo were there apparently to cover up gas cylinders, and they weren't for the Sunday barbie. Let's just call this the before. Wait for it. This is the after. Not the same spot, but you get the general picture. This is an interesting piece of captured munitions. The photo is entitled "A 16-foot German Aerial Torpedo." When you hear the word torpedo, you think of an offensive weapon employed in the water. This one, fresh in its crate, wasn't anywhere near the ocean, nor does it appear to have any form of propulsion. I gather, therefore, an aerial bomb is probably a more accurate term. Perhaps you can add to the background on this beast in the comments. This, we know exactly what we are looking at. It's a German trench mortar. The English translation of the official German name being medium mine launcher. The Allies gave it a nickname, the Troublemaker, for good reason. The recoil on the thing meant it certainly wasn't going to be launched from a carriage. It had a very short range of just 300 metres, a deadly reputation as a bunker buster, the ability to hurl a 50-kilogram mortar shell in the air every 3 seconds. It's a British airfield in Palestine, 1917, on which one fine day a disorientated German pilot plonks his albatross down onto. Bet he's feeling a right donk-off. One of the two A7V German tanks captured by the New Zealand division at Bapaume, France, 1918, presumably along with its crew of 20. This battle was the first time New Zealanders faced enemy tanks, and the world's first tank versus tank battle occurred there on that same day and at the same sector of the front as the New Zealanders. Just 20 of these were built, saw action. And this is the only type of German tank to see action in World War One. Well done to knock off 2. Is it just me? Or do you also think George Lucas and his team had a futuristic A7V in their subconsciousness when they came up with what you may call these? There is one remaining example of an A7V left. I'll tell you where it is shortly. In other words, I'm stringing you out. If you're enjoying this, don't forget there will be follow-ups, by the way, but as there's way too much material to put on one video. The German Army-on railgun. If you want to do more research on the Army-on railgun, it is spelled AMIENS. It became known as Little Bertha when it was captured by the Australians on the 8th of August 1918. The gun was originally from a dreadnought battleship, and it fired shells weighing an incredible 350 kilograms. That's 2 Kim.coms. A distance of 30 kilometres. Next stop Paris for display before being broken down and transported to Australia, where it similarly went on public display. It was thought at one point in the Second World War it could be put to good use as a naval battery. This, however, never happened, and it was mostly scrapped. Apart from the barrel, the 11-inch barrel is alive and painted, located outside the Australian War Museum in Canberra. Fascinating, eh? And that sole remaining German A7V. Mephisto. After spending much of its life in Brisbane, that's inside the Canberra Museum as well. Leave anything on the battlefield and the Aussies will flog it, I tell you. The photo description on this states, on duty at Charlie's Farm battery position, and Charlie's spelt CHARLEYS. 8th Reinforcements New Zealand Artillery. Mr. Google couldn't come up with a Charlie's Farm. If the soldier on the fire control is from the 8th Battery, well then, they were stationed at the Somme between March 1916 and January 1917. I'm going to throw this one open to the floor. Soldiers with their small box respirators casually stand round the entrance to their bunker, somewhere in the rear of Plugsiert sector, Western Front, Flanders, either 1917 or 1918 by my estimation, as those masks became standard in late 1916, protection against chlorine, mustard and phosgene gas attacks. It was phosgene that produced the most outright deaths. One of my grandfathers fell victim to gas, suffering thereafter a form of emphysema. Resultingly, he was well dead before I was born. What's left of a British Mark A tank of the French Second Army stranded on the battlefield near Aubert, France, 1918. They were better known by their nicknames, the Whippet, due to their mobility and speed, 15 kilometres per hour, full tit. The British set up a factory in France to reproduce them, and they were also exported and served with the Russians. Here's a complete Whippet. The modern-looking Whippet first went into action on March the 26th, 1918. That engagement also involved troops from New Zealand Infantry Division. Indeed, that's them marching past one of the tanks that very day. You'll notice the tank is the centre of attention. In terms of armament, it had 4 7.7 machine guns sticking out the sides of the turret, yet it only had a crew of 3, one of which was the driver. Nurse Oates Weymouth sucking on a gasper. Hard to find a photo from the First World War without a health roll somewhere in the frame. Between 500 to 600 Kiwi nurses served in the First World War. All volunteered for mostly the same reasons as the men. Sheer patriotism and a sense of adventure being near the top of the list. Besides patching blokes up, they also provided a psychological boost to the men starved of female company. As I've covered in this video, where a nursing ship was sunk, it was at times dangerous work. 11 went down with Marquette in October 1915. A link for that little number below in the description. When we have a mental image of medical tents in the midst of war, one is now tending to think about a scene from the TV series MASH. The day-to-day reality for a Kiwi nurse in WW1 meant she was just as likely to be dealing with troops suffering from the effects of gas, diphtheria, typhoid and dysentery than a missing left hand. Looking down at ANZAC Cove on the Gallipoli Peninsula, where supplies and troops are being ferried to and fro. What were in some of those crates, I wonder? Bully beef. A stack of it. If you were vegan, you were well out of luck. A soldier's life was strictly keto. Would get rid of your eczema in a couple of weeks. I'm getting towards the end of the average concentration span here, so I'll go out on this one from the same theatre. A periscope rifle set up in the front line at Gallipoli. Periscope rifles were invented in the First World War as trench warfare became the norm. Sticking your head above the top of the trench to peer around wasn't exactly advisable. Variants were certainly on the scene before Gallipoli in the midst of 1915. Necessity, however, is the mother of invention. An ex-builder from Australia called William Beach was at Gallipoli. Traumatised by his comrades regularly having their heads blown off, he designed and modified a standard Lee-Enfield .303 rifle, starting by cutting down the stock in half. Beach's improved modifications created whilst in the thick of it became standard on all fronts thereafter. In 2003 there was an Australian series called The Boffin, The Builder and The Bombardier. They recreated a Beach periscope rifle and tested its effectiveness, and this is an excerpt.
Oh, good shot. Then again, at 100 yards. Talk about historical accuracy.
Nice touch with the bag of paint behind the plywood silhouette. Thanks for popping by today. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you want to invest the next 10 minutes of your life wisely, then check out the needless sinking of the Marquette off the coast of Greece next. There's also heaps of World War I stuff and things that went boom in my messy, unkept vault. I'll spot you next time. Bye for now.